This is a lecture from OpenTuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
Well, in our first introductory lecture, we got introduced to all the different taxes. Those taxes that impacted on the individual, taxes that impacted on companies there. And we spoke about each of those taxes and the different components of each tax that would concern us within the syllabus. Going through the range of personal taxes, income tax, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, through to corporation tax, the tax on corporations, of course, there on limited companies. Also, then we looked at a business-based taxation, and that was VAT, value-added tax, as we will know it. Now, each of those taxes, of course, is going to be tested within this examination. The structure of the exam we now need to look at to see how and where these different taxes are likely to be tested. What we used to have was a choice of either a paper-based or indeed the computer-based examination so far as Tax UK was concerned. We're now left with, as you will see from now onwards, purely a computer-based examination. So the syllabus will be assessed on a 3-hour computer-based examination. Now the paper is going to contain both computational and discursive elements. Again, at this level, as compared to advanced taxation that you may choose to go on to in your later studies, we are far more computational based. But as we said in the terms of our previous lecture, the examining team have attempted to try to bridge somewhat that gap between what was purely computational, that now we call it the Tax UK paper, and what was the advanced taxation paper. So more discursive elements have come in, and you'll find those, as we'll discuss in a moment's time, principally within section C. But in terms of this paper, mostly computational, and all questions are compulsory. So there's no choice in the matter, which again you might think is a bad thing. In some ways it isn't, because again, where we have had choice in years gone by in terms of exams, students have often got confused and spent too much time over making that choice and sometimes made the wrong choice. Now, you've just got to get on with it and deal with it. We'll talk about exam technique, of course, of how you adapt to more problematical problems in a few minutes' time. Some questions will adopt a scenario or case study approach. Again, that is very much the style of advanced taxation, and we're going to get a sample of that now, but in a very gentle manner, a very benign fashion is the way it will be tested here. Now, it will be a familiar format to those of you who've done already some of the ACCA papers, in as much as we've got Section A, Section B and Section C. Now, we've mentioned the 5 big taxes there. Let's just look at how and where they will be tested, the things that we can be almost sure of. Well, to begin with, in Section C, we can be sure of something, and that is that we're going to have, in addition to 1 10-mark question, 2 15-mark constructed response. That's a fancy title. Constructed response, i.e. it requires written answers. Now, when I say written, that doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about a narrative answer. It will be a mix of still mostly computational, but some written work as well. Now, the thing that we are told about in terms of these 2 questions, as this note says here, is that those 2 15-mark questions will focus on income tax and corporation tax. Focus. So there may be other bits involved, but they're going to focus principally on those 2 taxes. So there we go. The 2 big taxes have the 2 biggest questions allocated to them on this examination paper. The 2 biggest taxes, income tax and corporation tax there. Now, we'll also see that, and in terms of the way in which they're tested, what will they be testing you on? Again, it varies, but principally, of course, in terms of income tax, some aspect of or the entirety of the income tax computation will be required of you. Now, inevitably, that particular question, covering, if it does, the entire income tax computation, will still have a focus on one main area. And one of the main areas that does get tested a lot in terms of the style of question that we see here is employment income, something we'll be looking at in Chapter 9. Now, for most taxpayers, employment income is very simple. It is their salary or wage that they receive at the end of the week or at the end of the month. But we're going to see a very much more interesting scenario, as we spoke of in our first introductory lecture, where in addition to any salary or wage, there may be a bonus that is paid to that individual. There may be a range of benefits that are provided by the employer to the employee. There may be certain expenses incurred by that individual. Are they allowable deductions or are they not? So Chapter 9 is a big chapter, and what we may see is a large chunk of that income tax question devoted to employment income. What will also get in the way of corporation tax is, again, probably in the majority of circumstances, the requirement to prepare the full pro forma corporation tax computation. But that corporation tax computation, of course, will still be, again, dominated by one type of income, that income being trading income. Now, companies, as we said, will be charged on their worldwide income and gains. And income comes in different forms that will be chargeable to UK corporate tax. It's not just trading. There may be some property income that the company has. There may be some interest income. There may also be chargeable gains, all of which feature on the corporate tax computation. But trading income of all the income sources is by far the largest. And what we'll discover, based on some of the discussions we've already had, but we'll have, of course, in detailed chapters later through this course, is in deriving that trading income. There's a lot of work to be done, worthy indeed of the majority, but certainly a lot of the marks devoted to this corporate tax 15-mark question. They would involve, we start the process of preparing a corporation tax computation with the statement of profit or loss, the financial statements there. And what we do is to adjust that net profit at the bottom of our statement of profit or loss to make it acceptable for taxation purposes. And in so doing, we will disallow a particular expense, depreciation, which, although absolutely fine, of course, in terms of financial statements, is not acceptable as an allowable deduction for any accounting period for a business. We're talking now about corporation tax. It will equally be true of the unincorporated trader. But what happens is we replace the disallowed depreciation charge with a system known as capital allowances. And what that does is to provide taxpayers, businesses, unincorporated or now talking about incorporated, with a mechanism by which every business goes through the same system and follows the same rules by which tax relief is gained for the qualifying expenditure on qualifying plant and machinery. So we do away with the depreciation charge, we add it back to our accounting net profit in deriving the taxable trading income, and instead we give capital allowances. Now those are two big areas. Now, of course, not every Section C 15-mark question is going to test the same thing. There will be other areas of corporate tax that may be tested here. Loss reliefs, for example. Companies, any business, incorporated and unincorporated. Sadly, when you set a business up, it doesn't come with a cast iron guarantee that, of course, it will be profitable. And even though most of the time it may be profitable, sometimes, of course, things don't go too well. Sometimes it's not your particular fault there. Things go wrong in the economy, but it's still your loss. So if HMRC, as they will tax us on profits, they've got to give us relief for losses. And that area, corporate tax losses, is an area that, again, would give itself over to the majority of a 15-mark corporate tax question. So we are definitely going to see an income tax and a corporation tax 15-mark question. Again, they probably on the majority of occasions, but not every occasion, require the preparation of an income tax computation that we look at within Chapter 2, which will be the first taught chapter so far as our course is concerned. Chapter 1 is just a general introduction to taxation, which you may or may not choose to go through from the very beginning, but at least you can have a quick skim read through to get the ideas behind it. But the stuff then you really do have to focus your attention on right from the very outset begins with Chapter 2, the income tax computation. Things that we look at in the income tax area. I mentioned a moment ago adjustment of profits and capital allowances. We learn for both the unincorporated trader and, with some differences noted in the corporate tax chapters, we learn for corporate tax as well. So we get introduced to the corporation tax computation in, I think it's chapter 16 there. So these are two big areas. So that's the two main taxes with the two biggest questions. Now there is another question here, a 10-mark question. Now then, that has been the one that has tended in recent times to be the one that's just a little bit different. The one that is more planning based. The one that is more discursive. Lots of written work potentially, as well as a little bit of numerical work to apply here. Again, questions will vary. But it's that one that attempts, as we said earlier, to bridge the gap between Tax UK as paper, as it's now known, and the advanced taxation paper. And what it will do is to take often a multi-tax approach, looking not at an individual taxation, either for the individual or, of course, for a company there, but looking at a multi-tax problem. That's more particular to individuals, to be fair, than it is to corporate taxation and companies. But looking at an individual, for example, an individual has decided, I'm fed up with being an employee and working for somebody else. I will work for myself. So I'm going to set up my own business. Right. There's a choice of business medium to be made. What does that mean? It means to keep it simple and you run your business as an unincorporated trade. Or if there's two or more of you, you set up a partnership there. Now, again, if it's unincorporated, any profits that are made, adjusted for taxation, will be chargeable to income tax as they arise. Again, it doesn't matter so far as an unincorporated trade is concerned how much money, cash, you may take out of your business. The individual will be assessed on the adjusted trading profit or the tax adjusted trading profit of that business. If you're a partner in a partnership, as you'll discover again in a later chapter, chapter 8 for partnerships there, you'll be doing exactly the same process of adjusting up the statement of profit or loss of the partnership, and you as a partner, you will be assessed on your share of that profit. So we're going to look at the income tax issues that pertain to running the business as an unincorporated trade. But that trading income, being earned income, is subject to another tax, and that, of course, is national insurance contributions. Again, those national insurance contributions will come in two forms. We'll discuss them, don't worry, in the detailed chapter. But NICs, national insurance contributions, will be chargeable. So that could be tested. So you could go down the unincorporated route. But equally, you could set up a company and go down the incorporated route. So that would mean that the company makes the profit. The company is then subject to corporation tax on those profits. The individual, the unincorporated trader, was subject to income tax on their adjusted profit. If we go down the incorporated route, as we've said, is the company, and will now be chargeable on what we'll call its taxable total profit to corporation tax there. But of course, what do you, the individual, the owner, manager of that company that you have set up, you're the owner, so you own the shares in the company, and you're the manager, the managing director of that company. It is an owner-managed company. What are you taxed on? Well, you will be taxed on what you take out of that company. Well, how can an owner-manager take money out of their company? Simple. In their capacity as owner, owning the shares, they can pay themselves dividends on their shares. And in their capacity as managing director, owner-manager, as MD, managing director there, they may pay themselves a salary. And that, as we spoke of a moment ago in terms of employment income, could be topped up with various assessable benefits there. So you would have to deal with the taxation of the company and then the extraction of the profits of the company by the owner-manager through either or both of two routes, the dividend route and, of course, the salary route there. And any salary that you pay yourself just as with the unincorporated trader suffering not just income tax but also national insurance contributions, so does the employee suffer national insurance contributions on their employment income. So we're looking at a range of taxes. Now let's be sensible about this in terms of this 10-mark question. There is a serious limit on how much they can test you on. And what they do is do not leave it as just a general open-ended question. So this is the situation, setting up the business, it's going to be making these profits, we're going to be taking this much of those profits out of the business. Advise, no, you'll be led through it in terms of the requirements. Now that is not something you can do having studied any one chapter within this particular text, within our study notes. It's why it's the final chapter, tax planning style questions, that attempts to bring the individual taxes, the things that you've studied within each tax, together to look at this type of scenario, whereby we can work out, of course, there, not just what the total tax charges are, though that may be a requirement. We could even work out what the individual really wants to know, and that is, well, which route will leave me, the taxpayer, after all taxes have been paid, with the maximum net cash after tax, in my pocket. So that could be an issue. Though again, that is stretching it for this exam. That is very much more the domain of advanced taxation. Now again, be realistic. That might sound a little bit scary in terms of some of the things and the ranging across different taxes that I've spoken of. But this is only a 10-mark question. So they're going to be very precise and very reasonable in terms of the requirements that they set for you on any such question. But it's a good introduction to the things that you'll need to be able to do at advanced taxation. Because when, say, an individual in that situation comes to you in practice, they don't just say, could you please tell me what my income tax position is? They say, here I am, this is what I intend to do. Can you tell me now what taxes will be involved and how much of each tax will have to be paid, and therefore what will I be left with after all taxes? That's our job as the accountant, to tell our client those things. But again, you will only get a very small cross-section of that for what is a mere 10 marks, as we're seeing there. That will go up to maybe 20, 25, 30 marks when you move on to look at advanced taxation. Okay, so that 10 marker there is going to be on different taxes. It's going to be a multi-tax scenario. You will find out a lot more about that after you've studied each individual taxation and you've then studied through and worked the examples within chapter 26. You'll get mention of it as well as we go through some of the individual chapters. I'll be making brief reference to say, well, look at that situation there. That could be a topic indeed that is going to be involved in terms of tax planning. But most of that stuff is found in chapter 26. Okay, so we've got the two big taxes which are going to be predominant within the section C of the paper. We've got one 10 mark, two 15 marks, so there's 40 marks there. And these are written answers that we are producing, albeit on our computer there. Now again, if you don't choose to do section C first within the examination, it's your call as to which particular questions you answer first. But if you choose to go through in order, section A, section B, and finally to section C, make absolutely certain that you leave yourself sufficient time to be able to answer all three questions within that section. Make sure you give yourself your full-time allocation. This section is critical to your examination well-being, shall I call it. You may like the idea of objective testing questions. I don't want to worry you here, but objective testing questions are more difficult in many ways in terms of passing the exam here than section C. With written response questions, you get rewarded for what you do. You do an exercise, a calculation, make a statement that is correct, you can earn a half a mark, 1 mark, 1.5, 2 marks there. 2 marks I've gone up to with that. You could get any part of that. Whatever you get right, you are rewarded for. But an objective testing question, we're going to turn our attention now to section A, which is these 15 2-mark objective testing questions. So 30 marks to be had here. And with an objective testing question for 2 marks, it's all or nothing. There may be 2, 3, 4 steps that you have to take to get to that final correct answer. And you pick the correct one, you get all 2 marks. If you pick the wrong one, you get no marks. Now, in terms of those solutions offered, they're not, of course, 1 right answer and 3 ridiculous figures that have no significance and no meaning at all. The examiners have thought these out. They are responses that could be worked by the student who is not able to fully understand and complete the exercise. And this is the problem with these objective testing questions. They're all or nothing, which is great if you get it all, the full 2 marks. But if you get halfway, 3/4 of the way to getting it right, in section C on a 2-mark part, if you got it 3/4 right, you get 1.5 marks. In a section A objective testing question, you get nothing. So you must make certain that you leave yourself sufficient time to be able to get good responses down to section C. Because that is where, although yes, there may be things that you can't do or you can't fully do, you will be rewarded positively for the things that you do right. You can get the 0.5 marks, the 1 marks, the 1.5. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. It's right or it's wrong. Now in section A, therefore, again, we have that as an issue. Now hopefully it won't be a problem because we will be able to compute the correct figure there or identify the correct statement that has been made out of those provided to you, what is right, what is wrong, etc. there. But be careful with, again, the specific requirement. It is a very obvious statement for me to now make. Read the questions requirements carefully. But what you've now got is a whole lot more questions. Back in the good old days, we might have to do 5 questions, so 5 requirements, albeit some would have subsections there. But equally, any of those subsections of those questions, for the marks allocated to it, you could get parts thereof. Now it's all or nothing. And again, often we are too eager to start getting buttons pressed on our calculator to try to work numbers to come up with one of the numbers are offered to us as being the answers there. Now we have to be very careful about reading the requirement carefully. For example, and we won't fully appreciate this yet, and I will remind you as we go through, when we prepare an income tax computation, now we could be asked to compute purely the figure of taxable income, the amount of income by its name that is taxable, that is chargeable to tax. We could be asked to compute an income tax liability, or we could be asked to compute an income tax payable. Now, all of these outcomes are different. In the case of income tax liability and income tax payable, they may be different, they may be one and the same. Trust me, in terms of an objective testing question, they would give you sufficient information to be able to compute either tax liability or tax payable. You have to make sure you picked up the right one. So you've got to read the question carefully. In terms of capital gains tax, you could be asked to compute the taxable gain. Or prior to that even, you could be asked to compute the chargeable gain. So is it the chargeable gain made? Is it the taxable gain made? Is it the CGT liability that they're asking you to compute based on the information provided within the question? So it is critical that you read that requirement very carefully indeed. Do not rush in to press the buttons on your calculator. Make sure you've understood what that question is asking you to do. Because remember, On those questions, it's all or nothing. You misunderstand the requirement, you will invest time in that question, and it will be time wasted, because at the end of that time you spend, you are guaranteed to come out with the wrong answer because you've not read the requirement of the question carefully enough. So again, be careful in relation to those. Now, in terms of section A, we know, therefore, you'll be used to by now the style of question. I'm just forewarning you, in terms of taxation, there are many requirements that may sound the same, but are different in some way, shape or form. It's critical that you've understood the real requirement of that particular question. And what you'll see in section A is a range of taxes. You could have questions on all of the taxes. It's a balancing act, depending on what they've done in section B, which I'll come to in a moment, and section C. Section A then picks up the pieces. Again, students often like the idea of objective testing question. It's not always this way. We're now with computer-based exams, but you're thinking, well, the answer's there. All I've got to do is find it, therefore. Not as easy sometimes as we think. And what we've got to make sure of, therefore, is that, as I say, why it's not always as the benefit to students that you sometimes think it is it allows the examiners to spread across the syllabus. So rather than narrowly defining the requirements of a question when they're big written questions, prepare an income tax comp, prepare a corporation tax comp, calculate the CGT liability or IHT payable in relation to the individual. It now enables a more micro analysis of the syllabus to pick out individual areas that are not covered elsewhere. Now, it is almost certain here that you will find certain of those questions that you can't do. Again, in terms of the content of our study notes, I will never, ever guarantee that every possible examination question you might see, very specifically in section A, that you will have the ability to get that right. We are producing a set of notes that are about, well, a small fraction of the size of study manuals. If you want to try to know everything, you need your study manual there from one of the approved providers, of course, and very good they are. What we're doing in terms of our notes and these lectures is to provide you with the ability to pass this examination. Now, if you want to go on from that and do more, fantastic. But if you choose to do that, do it after you've actually got the basics understood. Be very careful not to invest a ridiculous amount of time in what are very, very or relatively small areas. You make sure you cover these notes first of all. When you practice, as you will need an exam kit, a revision kit, again from one of those ACCA approved providers there. In working those questions, that's where you may have to revert to a study manual, for example, for the occasional question where I haven't seen that before. So what we are doing is to give you a set of notes that allows you, as thousands of students before you have done, to pass this examination. That is our objective. It would be nice to see you getting 100 marks, but it is imperative that you score 50 marks. That's the difference here. Now, certainly in terms of performance that I've seen for students when they report back after exams each year, students have been able to score a lot more than 50. Trust me on that, a lot more. But what you've got to do is to get the basics thoroughly understood. So, section A, you will find questions that go into some fine point, possibly in some detail. Don't worry about it. Leave it alone. What you mustn't be doing is, if there are, say, as there may be, 3 or 4 of the 15 objective testing questions that are particularly difficult for you, and you're really struggling to know what to do and how to do it, don't waste your time on those at the beginning of the exam if you've chosen section A to do first here. Because if you have those, let's say, 4 questions that are particularly troublesome for you, and we spend 3, 4, 5 minutes on each of those questions, possibly banging our heads against the proverbial brick wall, suddenly you've spent 3, 4, 5 minutes on 4 questions and you've earned nothing. So you have spent there sufficient time that could have been devoted to, say, the 10-mark question in section C. And you've let that time slip by with no reward. Which is why, if you do start with section A, you make sure you go through and you pick out those exercises that you are confident with. You know, you've read the requirement, you've understood the requirement, you can do the calculations, or you can identify the correct statement or statements there. And you make sure you get those right. If there are things that you simply cannot do or find very difficult to do, leave it. Leave it until the end of the exam. And if in the final minute of the exam there are 2 or 3 Section A objective testing questions that you still don't know, pick your favourite letter. Go with your favourite there. But what you must ensure is that within the 3 hours that you have available to you, that you have secured from that exam, the one in front of you, you have secured every possible mark that your knowledge would have allowed you to secure, and not lost out on marks that you could and you should have scored. Why? Because you were chasing and using up time the marks that you weren't able to score. So be sensible. This is what basic exam technique is all about. Exam technique is very simple. It means that based on the knowledge that you take into the examination room with you, you are able to exploit that knowledge to ensure that you do secure the marks that you could and should score. Students with the capacity to pass this exam who fail the exam fail that test. What they've done is to waste time doing things that they shouldn't be doing because they don't know how to do them, and they've missed out on marks that they could and should have got. So you maximise your time, your performance in terms of securing those marks. All right. Section A, across the board, 15 objective testing questions. Don't waste time banging head against a brick wall on the really difficult ones that are difficult for you, that is. Hopefully there won't be any of those. You'll think, oh yeah, easy, bring it on. Test me, why don't you, Mr. Examiner here, or Mrs. Examiner, I should also say. But don't waste time and make sure you've read the requirement carefully. In terms of Section C, big income tax, big corporation tax question, and probably a mix, a multi-tax question for the 10-marker. So what that means we're left with in terms of Section B, 3 questions. Again, we're in objective testing question format. 5 objective questions of 2 marks based on the scenario laid down for you. Now, again, you'll be led through this. Again, they're not as challenging as we might think. But let's think what's going to be tested here, or probably is going to be tested here. And we've got income tax, we've got corporation tax. In terms of the 10 mark, it could be a bit of everything, say including national insurance contributions. Section A is a mix of everything. Again, it could be every tax there. So the main objective of these 3 questions is picking up on the other taxes. The remaining 2 personal taxes, so we've got capital gains tax and inheritance tax. And of course the indirect taxation as we know it, VAT. So we're likely to see those 3 questions focused in on those 3 taxes there. Now again, you may not be able to do correctly each of the 5 questions on each of those taxes. Don't waste your time in terms of things that are too demanding, you can't do it. Or you think, I'm not sure about this. Make sure on a first run through anyway, you picked out and you have properly performed on each of those questions that you could and should get right, and you've nailed it. You've got those marks, and then you move on. Again, 3 hours sounds like a long time, but I'm sure you've done exams before, and you may have discovered in the past, and you certainly will in the future, that 3 hours is not as long as you think, and therefore it will go very quickly. You cannot afford to waste any time here, and you've got to make sure with every one of those now, so many requirements, 15 objective testing questions across the board, section A. 3 lots of 5, another 15 objective testing questions then in terms of section B, and then the 3 big questions, and certainly the income and corporation tax questions could be broken down, and probably will be broken down into subsections. Do this for 9 marks, do this for 6, do this for 10, do this for 3, do this for 2, etc. there. They'll be broken down. There's a lot of things to be done. Make sure you read the requirements carefully, make sure you answer those requirements specifically, and make sure you don't waste time at the expense of missing out on other marks elsewhere on the paper that you could and should score. Now, all of that, of course, is exam day. Between now and then, you've got to be prepared for that. So the first part of the course is for you, therefore, to ensure as we go through each of the taxes. The first tax we'll be looking at will be income tax. The first main tax, personal tax, will be income tax that we look at, where we'll be kicking off with Chapter 2, the introduction to the income tax computation there, and we'll take it from there. We'll then go through for capital gains tax for the individual. We'll move to corporation tax and then chargeable gains that are subject to corporate tax, before finally through to inheritance tax and value-added tax there. Now, you've got to make sure that as we go through, you do all the exercises, you follow the lectures through, you do the exercises that I'll take you through, you do the exercises that I assign you to do, you do the exercises and the additional reading that is determined at the end of each chapter. Sometimes students ask me the question about, oh, you've said about do practice question this and practice question that. Where are they? If you look at your contents page, at the first page of these notes, you'll see that they are tucked in at the very end of these notes. So do make sure you know where to find them, and only do them as allocated to you following each chapter. Once you've done all the chapters, if there are any outstanding ones, which I don't think there will be, then you can do those. Now, what you'll also need, in addition to your OpenTuition material, you've got your study notes, which, as we've explained, those study notes tell you what you need to know, what you must know to be able to pass the examination. The lectures will take you through those study notes. They'll take you through at least all the technical chapters that we deal with, and we'll discuss again those. We'll mention them with an overview in a few minutes' time. But apart from the OpenTuition material, there is also one critical essential. It's all well and good learning, little bit of practice from what I provided to you through the OpenTuition material. But you do need then that essential question practice. The only way you will get to grips with this particular subject is through practice. Now, you cannot practice until you have actually put the study hours in. It's no good you just starting, well, have a look at the exam questions and I'll have a little look at how they answer those. No, you have to get the basic knowledge before you go anywhere near any such past examination questions. So, the knowledge that you need to have, the essentials, are contained within your study notes. The lectures will take you through and allow you, hopefully, to get to grips with the basic understanding. But it's then an application of that knowledge that is essential. That's done with question practice. There are many examples within each chapter. At the end of each chapter, there are practice questions that are, again, referenced there. We've already mentioned this, but the practice questions to be found, again, towards the end of the study notes. But everything is listed out on the contents page. You can see where to find them. But then you need more than that. Again, some of this question practice will happen during your period of study. As you move through one tax, then you'll be able to practice. You then move on and study a further tax and practice that, and so on and so forth. But you'll also have that, again, absolutely essential period of revision immediately prior to the examination, by which I mean 3 to 4 weeks maybe before the exam. If you're in a position to start your revision there, again, a lot will depend on how much time you personally have available to devote, 1 to your studies and then 2 to the revision part of that study work as well. But ideally, you'll be beginning that revision. You'll have basically covered each of the taxes you need for the syllabus. within 3 to 4 weeks of the exam date. And then the rest of it will be going back over, revising that material, and that is done best through question practice. So what do you need? You need, now there are different names here given by the different providers, but an exam kit or a revision kit there, it's known by an ACCA provider. Essentially now I think we've got both BPP and Kaplan as being the main providers there. And each of those texts is excellent. What you will find about those texts in terms of the study manual, I'll talk about that again very shortly, they're huge. The exam kits themselves are pretty large, but they're doing exercises. They are practice, practice, practice. That combination of section A, section B and section C questions. Again, through that process, you will then be able to hone the skills that hopefully you've developed through your basic study period and get you in a position to comfortably pass this examination. So you need to purchase one of those exam kits, and it has to be the right one. It's not like with other subjects where a syllabus review might take place every few years and then a couple of things change. With tax, it's changing every year. Sometimes those changes are more fundamental. Sometimes they're minimal. But often what they will always do, well, indeed what they will always include, is changes in rates and allowances. Some of the basic nitty-gritty. You need to have the relevant kit for your particular exams. Now, for the exams from June 21 through to March 22, we are talking about Finance Act 2020. Finance Act 2021, whenever we get that will be exams June 2022 through to March 23 there. You cannot use any other kit. You will know which exam you're going for. You will, again, be required. It is necessary to get that material. Don't go buying some second-hand old one in the belief, well, that'll be okay. No, it won't. You need the designated material. Now, that's the only other material that I would say you absolutely must have in terms of you've got to buy it. Then there comes the question of, well, what about a study manual? Now, if you have the funds available, a study manual is great. But let me explain something important to you. A study manual is not really a reading book. These books have 700 to 1,000 pages. With the best will in the world, you are not going to get your head around everything on every page within those study manuals. What they're really good at is being reference books, something to check to. If you see a question and there's something in the answer or the question and then the answer that you don't know that are potentially, over and above what are contained within our OpenTuition study notes, you've got a point of reference. You can go find what that is. They're also good, again, not just in terms of things that, again, the few things that are not within our OpenTuition notes, but also the things that are, if maybe you need a bit more backup, you need some, again, more basic examples. Again, absolutely fine. Now, you don't need it to pass and comfortably pass this exam. That has been proven time after time, year after year after year. So don't fear if you can't. But if, as many of you, as I know from questions you posed on the Ask the Tutor forum, want to develop a really, really good knowledge, then fine, do that. But what you mustn't do is do your first study from the study manual. That will take way too much time, too many detailed facts on each of the individual taxes. You'll get muddled. And I don't, again, want to be patronising here, but this is what happens. 1,000 pages worth of material. That is one hell of a lot that we're talking in terms of. So what you need to do, use your OpenTuition notes. That's your starting point, but with the lectures. Again, go through with the lectures. Not a skim read for yourself. Go through with the lectures. They take you through. I hope they explain clearly to you what each of the issues is and the relevance of that in terms of your examination. You must do that. But again, then when it comes to doing questions, and especially section A, the objective testing questions, Now, the world is the oyster, as the old saying goes. 700 to 1,000 pages worth of study material. That's a lot to choose from. Again, for any examiners, or to be more precise in terms of the material, if it's BPP or Kaplan, what those particular tutorial organisations have decided to put in as a question. And some of those are very fine points of detail, and no one is going to be able to get every one of those questions right. But that's where potentially, as I say, as you go through those questions, you come across an exam kit question. And you think, well, I don't know, I haven't seen this. Then you've got a study manual to refer to. You get problems along the way in terms of maybe there's insufficient for you personally, maybe within the lectures or the study notes that we provide. Then you've got a backup reference book, but they're a reference book. So again, study notes, OpenTuition study notes and our lectures, first of all, then into your exam kits for some practice, over and above what you have done from the practice part of the study notes themselves. And if you have problems with them, there is by your side this comfort blanket of a study manual. So it's there if you need to refer to it. And that's it. But again, do you need it to pass the exam? No. But will you then in the exam find, yes, the odd issue that you haven't seen before? You will. I'm never going to guarantee that you're going to have within our study notes that number just 100 and something pages in terms of the actual study notes, and then there's examples and answers to them on top of that. That is tiny by comparison to the big study manuals and the huge exam kits. So you concentrate, as we've said, on getting the core knowledge, then you practice through the exam kit. Things in there you don't understand, then you can go to your study manual. Obviously, if there's anything within the OpenTuition material that you don't understand and you've gone through the notes, you've gone through the lectures in conjunction, with that still causing you a problem, then you have the Ask the Tutor forum to send a question to me. But do make sure before you send such questions that you have done what you need to do. And what you need to do, as I've said, is to make sure you've worked through the notes and the lectures methodically and you've done the relevant practice there on. Okay, in terms of the lectures themselves, after, as we now come to the end of our introductory chapters, it'll be time for you then to get stuck into the detailed technical chapters. Chapter 1 is just a background read. I don't want you spending much time, if any, at this point. Maybe, again, just spending a little bit of background reading time. You're not studying it, it's background reading. It isn't really stuff that's going to form the basis of examination questions. Nothing that you won't otherwise pick up through the detail. But it's necessary for you to have a quick look at that just to get a few terms understood. But where it really starts to become important, and there are a few chapters more important than where you'll go next when we start those technical studies, Chapter 2, the income tax computation. And the income tax part of your syllabus is huge. That goes all the way through to and including Chapter 10. And again, we talk about that at the beginning of Chapter 2. We've then got one tiny little tax, national insurance contributions, that we've mentioned in our previous introductory lectures as well, which are further additional taxes in relation to employment income and the profits of the self-employed. A further personal taxation is capital gains tax, CGT as it's known, for individuals. And we split our study of capital gains into two. Firstly, the personal tax side, which is chapters 12 through to 14. And then we've got from chapter 19 through to chapter 21, much of which is repetition, where we're simply saying same issues as you had to deal with in chapters 12 to 14, but there's maybe one or two differences in terms of the treatment, and these are issues maybe more likely to set in a corporate tax context rather than a personal tax context. So there's your capital gains. We've got the second biggest tax next to income tax as corporation tax. And corporation tax to begin with, chapter 16 through to 18. We've also then got chapter 22, which is looking at groups of companies rather than just a single company there. We've then got the two other major taxes, inheritance tax, VAT. Again, it is likely that you will find that, as we already know, section C contains a guaranteed 15-mark income tax question and also a guaranteed 15-mark corporate tax question. Section B, 3 questions, each of 10 marks, 5 objective testing questions on each of those scenarios, which basically deal with these other taxes: capital gains, the inheritance tax, and the VAT parts of our syllabus. National insurance contributions could be brought into an income tax problem, even potentially into a corporate tax problem when you're looking at an employer, the company. You can see that again, or in section A as an individual question. The only other chapters I haven't mentioned there are chapters 15 and chapter 23, where you've got admin. Now, admin will come up in your exam, but admin, to be honest, is not something that you should be studying early on in your studies. It is a bit like law, thankfully only a small part of our particular syllabus, of course, but law in as much as there's a whole lot of learning to be done in terms of the administration system. And that is the sort of thing that possibly for many of you, certainly it was for me as a student, not that I can remember being a student, of course, but sticks in the short-term memory rather than the long-term memory. And therefore, I would suggest that the doing chapters that I've just said, income tax, national insurance contributions, capital gains, corporation tax, inheritance tax, VAT, those are the ones that you deal with and practice and, well, you won't necessarily perfect, but you get up to exam standard in. And once you're comfortable with those and you've had plenty of practice, then have a look at the admin and try to learn as much of it as you can. It will be tested, but again, it's just regurgitation of learnt knowledge. Whereas the other exercises you do, they're all doing exercises. And that is something that you can and must prepare for from a much earlier date prior to the exam. That's my advice. On chapters 15 and 23, there are no lectures because it's learning. This is an administration rule. You need to learn it. You don't need me to talk you through that, though if, of course, you have queries in relation to any part of it, then again, you can send me a question. But again, you simply need to be studying those to learn those. But again, closer to exam date, and once you are comfortable with the other doing exercises of the other big 5 taxes to which those administration issues pertain. You'll find then also chapter 26. Now, chapter 26, again, doesn't have any lectures that's attached to that. But what it's doing is to take the things that we've learned in the other technical chapters on each of the personal taxes and corporate and other business taxes there. And it puts them into a planning scenario. So it's nothing you haven't seen before, but you haven't seen it packaged in that way. The exercises that you're asked to do, taking technical knowledge that you have, or should have by that point, and mixing it all together in a planning scenario. For example, when an individual sets up a business, they could set that business up as an unincorporated trader, and as an unincorporated trader, it's all about income tax. And as an unincorporated trader making profits, it would be about certain types of national insurance contributions relevant to them that would be payable on their profits. But what they could do instead is to set up their business as a company. They could incorporate their business and therefore set it up as a company. Companies pay corporation tax. Again, at that stage, you'll have learned all the details of the corporate tax computation and what goes into it. And companies are employers, and employers also have to pay national insurance contributions. So there could be that aspect to it. If you are the owner-manager of a company, then you will wish to take money out of the company. How do you extract profits? Well, how do we extract the profits from our company? If we set the company up, we are the owner and we're a director, maybe the director of that particular company. In our capacity as owner, we own shares. And what's paid on those shares? Dividends. You'll know, pardon me, how to deal with dividend income from your income tax studies. In your capacity as manager, owner managed companies here, you'll be a director of the company and you may pay yourself a salary. Employment income. Again, you'll have dealt with that in terms of your income tax studies. So it's taking stuff you already know, putting it into a planning scenario. It isn't just this is how you deal with an unincorporated trade. This is how you deal with an incorporated trade. But given the level of performance of that particular business and what cash you're looking to take out of that business, then which one is right for you? Would it be better from a tax perspective to go down the unincorporated route or the incorporated route? So we bring together, in terms of that chapter, scenarios and technical issues that we've seen before, but put them into scenarios that you haven't seen before. And again, that simply needs you to work through the notes and the examples that attach to that. Okay, time enough then in terms of our introduction now. Hopefully you've got a flavour indeed of what is involved. And now it's time for the really hard work to begin. It will take time, it will take effort. If you're willing to put that in, then you can look forward to succeed in the terms of this exam. If you think you can just end load and do it all at the end immediately prior to the exam, well, some of you may be good enough to do that, but it's not advisable. You need a proper study period to be able to get to grips with the volume of material that is involved within this particular subject. Hopefully you will do that, hopefully you will succeed, and hopefully we'll maybe get a bit of enjoyment along the way. Certainly a lot of learning. I'll see you next on Chapter 2.